All right, and we're looking pretty good. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Capital Connection. I'm so excited to have you here so we can talk about Michigan's landmark climate laws, which were signed on Tuesday. The governor put pen to paper at a big ceremony in Detroit, and we were real pleased to be there and to see the progress that's being made on climate. Uh, this has been quite a journey. And today we're going to have a chance to talk with Carly Knott. Carly is one of our policy experts at the Michigan Environmental Council who has been deeply involved in the crafting of this policy, the analysis of the bills, negotiations in the Capitol, and of course, the end time celebration. Carly, welcome back to the webinar. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Happy to be back.
I also want to share with folks before we get going, you see a little bit of our new brand in place here. The Michigan Environmental Council has been going through a process of rebranding our organization, trying to get us sort of more lively, more attuned to the current day. And part of that process is changing the language that we use, the approach that we make to our member organizations and the community, but also it's about our visual identity. And so, like here on the screen, you have what is our new logo mark. Bo Brockett's in the background. I'll ask Bo to throw a link in the chat to our website where you can learn a little bit more about the logo mark and what we're trying to do with our visual communications. I think that comms team's done a pretty exciting job, and you'll see it reflected more and more in the materials that the Environmental Council is putting forward. And I hope you like it. I hope you find it as exciting as I do, and you see it everywhere. For example, on our brand new mugs, which I also am really grateful for. Thanks for those, Bo and Grace. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk climate. Carly, this was a really big week, but that big week is really the culmination of years and years of advocacy and research. I want to drag us back in time a little bit. A year and a half ago, we the governor had the My Healthy Climate Plan and put out some really important recommendations in that policy that would get us to carbon neutral by 2050. That was the big goal coming out of that plan. The Environmental Council, NRDC, Rocky Mountain Institute, others did an analysis of that plan at the time and found that as good as the plan was, we were going to fall a little bit short of our 2050 goal unless we had some policy interventions that would accelerate the transition, particularly in the energy sector. With the signing of the bills on Tuesday and with the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, and cross our fingers, like the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to flow into Michigan with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund from the federal government, we are now truly on a path to 100% clean energy. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that goal is in statute, what it looks like, and break it down for us? What is the clean energy future of Michigan really look like now that we have laws in place?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 271 that the governor signed on Tuesday is the bill for the clean energy standard. And like you said, that does put into place what the governor had in the My Healthy Climate Plan, which was having a 50% renewable energy standard by 2030. So this bill has both a renewable energy standard and a clean energy standard. And so the definitions for renewable are a little bit tighter, maybe not as tight as we would have liked, but really limiting the carbon emissions that those renewable resources can put out. So there is a 50% standard by 2030, and then a 60% renewable standard by 2035. So that's things like solar, wind, um, hydropower, geothermal, and then some biomass and biogas. And then the clean energy standard is 80% by 2035 and then 100% by 2040. And with the clean energy, the goal there was to limit the carbon emissions that our utilities can emit. And so we got pretty close to having zero emissions with this goal, not quite there. The policy still allows for carbon capture and storage on natural gas plants, and that has to be at the 90% level, so still limiting those carbon emissions a lot. So that we do have cleaner energy sources. And then the other big resource included in the clean energy is nuclear, since there are no carbon emissions from nuclear power, even though we still have some other environmental impacts that come from nuclear energy. But overall, it's really going to reduce our carbon emissions in Michigan, having these really strong standards that our utilities have to abide by.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, uh, clean energy is really about the climate crisis. It's about eliminating carbon emissions from the energy sector. And it is our intent to get there 100% by 2040. We also want to make sure that energy generation in Michigan is coming from more and more renewable sources. And so 60% of all of our energy will be from renewable sources by that 2040 mark as well, at
Yes.
least. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, and let's talk a little bit about this carbon capture challenge in the frame of clean energy. So we're trying to reduce all the carbon that we can out of the emissions from our energy sector. Natural gas, it sounds like, is still going to be a part of the mix, though. Carbon capture is the answer to that. How does that work?
Yeah. So I think this is something that the utilities really push for in trying to get the votes to pass these bills. Uh, they think that the 100% renewable is very ambitious. So that's why we kind of have this clean energy standard. And they push for natural gas, which is still a fossil fuel, to be allowed in there. So the compromise then is that they have to use carbon capture and storage to limit the carbon emissions that come from their natural gas plants. And it's carbon capture and sequestration, it's still an emerging technology. We haven't really seen it used in the field yet, but it's something that there's federal incentives for. I think the fossil fuel industry is really interested in it. So if they are able to utilize that technology in the future, it will be an improvement on the current natural gas plants that they have if they start capturing the carbon emissions that come off of that.
So in 2040, we have 60% of our energy in Michigan coming from straight up renewables. About 20% of our energy generation right now is from nuclear. So that leaves this final 20% to be from natural gas, presumably, hopefully not, but worst case scenario. And of that 20%, 90% of that is going to have to be carbon neutral as the bare minimum. Is that right?
Yeah, in as the policies passed, yes.
So if I'm doing the math, then worst case scenario in 2040, just 2% of our energy generation is emitting carbon into the air. And as technology improves and hopefully policy improves, um, we can get higher than, or we can get lower than 2% incrementally, incrementally, incrementally.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's important to note that nuclear is not 100% clean. Can you talk about the nuclear as part of this challenge?
Yeah, so Michigan already uses a lot of nuclear to meet their energy needs. I think around 20% in Michigan. So that's why instead of just having a clean energy standard, we felt that having a renewable energy standard was really important, especially in the short term, so that in addition to having a clean nuclear energy, utilities are also actually building out the renewable energy resources that we want to see, the wind and solar power. But yeah, just the reality of reliability and things. We think utilities argue that they still want to be able to use nuclear energy. So then that becomes a part of the clean energy standard where they're still able to use that. And from a climate perspective of limiting our greenhouse gas emissions, nuclear is a clean energy. It doesn't give off emissions like fossil fuels do. Um, so it is included there, but obviously nuclear has some other issues that we would be concerned about environmentally, like what to do with the nuclear waste and how it impacts communities that live around big nuclear plants.
Yeah, so nuclear energy generation remains a high priority environmental concern. But from a climate change standpoint, it is not as much a concern. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, sure.
He's like, sure, sure, boss, whatever you say. Uh, okay, so clean energy was such a huge part of the goal, and it's received a lot of attention. But there are some really other critically and beautifully important parts of this package. Um, we don't get to save the planet just by wasting energy. So a big part of this is making sure that our buildings, our homes, our businesses are more energy efficient too. What what is the future of energy efficiency under the new law?
Yeah, so that Senate Bill 273 that was passed deals with our energy waste reduction standards in Michigan, which it was great that we already had these standards. And it requires utilities to offer energy efficiency programs to their customers. And so the bill that we passed really improves upon that current program that we have. It makes it so that municipal and cooperative utilities also have to participate in those programs again and offer energy efficiency work to their customers. It raises the level of energy efficiency spending that the utilities have to do. Um, so
And that increase
it,
is significant, right? It's
it's
a lot.
it's not as much as we would have liked, but on the energy side, their energy waste reduction goals go from I think it's let me make sure I'm saying the numbers right. From 1% to 1.5%, with a goal of 2%. So it offers incentives for utilities to spend more on their energy waste reduction. And then from the gas, the standard before this legislation was 0.75% savings. And so that one was definitely a little modest, but boosting it up to 0.875% savings. So utilities will have to spend more, do more energy efficiency work for customers. And importantly, we got some low income spending requirements put into that bill. So it's 25% of electric, I think, and 30% of gas spending has to go towards low income households. And so that really ensures that the customers that need affordable energy the most are the ones receiving the benefits from this energy efficiency work. There's also some other important pieces of the bill, like allowing for health and safety spending. So if a home can't get weatherized because they have a hole in the roof, it allows utilities to be able to spend money on fixing that hole in order to be able to do the weatherization in those homes, which was an important piece for us as well.
Those investments in the low income community and the flexibility of those dollars are just one part of uh, a new attentiveness to energy justice that we see in these bills. Um, maybe the biggest change is that the Public Service Commission can take into account some of these factors now. What do you see the PSC being able to do thanks to these laws that we haven't been able to do in the past in Michigan?
Yeah, so one of the other bills that was passed into law is Senate Bill 502, and that expands the MPSC's authority in their integrated resource planning cases. So those are really the long-term plans that utilities have to submit, detailing where their resources are coming from. That's the opportunity to ensure that utilities are building out renewable resources and planning for those in the future. And uh, there's also the Utility Consumer Participation Board that funds groups to be able to intervene in those processes. And that bill tripled the funding for the UCPB.
Mhm.
So now more environmental and environmental justice groups will be able to participate in those IRP processes to be able to push for more renewables and have a stronger voice for environmental justice communities in those proceedings. But the main piece of that bill actually expands the authority of the MPSC. So generally in those IRP cases, they're just looking at reliability and the cost of resources. Now they're able to factor in climate, equity, um, health, affordability into their decision-making processes. So when intervening groups and utilities submit different kind of evidence of what the environmental justice, climate impacts of their resource plans will be, the MPSC now has authority to factor in some of those other factors into their decision making. So they're not solely basing their decisions on reliability and cost.
That's it's a really exciting, if sort of technical aspect of the new law. In so many places in Michigan's environmental protection regime, we talk about the passion of the public servants to protect the environment. For example, at Environment Great Lakes and Energy Department, but they are not working in a public policy framework that allows them to maximize the impact of those passions. The laws are not as good as the people in many cases. In and so changing the mandate to the Public Service Commission to include equity and affordability and climate and health, we're really saying to the public sector, the public service sector, um, listen to the people, do the people's work here, and feel empowered to do it. I think this is very exciting, and should be these integrated resource plans and the arguments that are made in rate cases based on those plans should be very, very different moving forward than they have been over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it's really a great opportunity to continue to push our utilities to build out the renewables and have the clean energy transition that we're looking for in these bills.
So if we're going to get to 100% clean energy, or higher than the renewable standard, there are a lot of barriers to that. There are technological barriers. We don't exactly know how all this stuff's going to play out. There are resource acquisition barriers, like where the raw materials come from for building solar panels. One of the major challenges that we faced in Michigan is you need a lot of land for solar. Square miles worth of land if you really want to power a community. When utilities have proposed large scale solar projects around the state, they have received really mixed responses from local governments where those facilities would be placed, and it's created sort of a tension between the need to generate clean energy, the landowner's interest as a private property owner, and the community's interest as how their community is going to be developed and what it's going to look like. One of the new laws really transforms the process of siting solar projects around the state, um, and it does try to walk a line and make a balance between people, community, and industry. Can you share how that framed up in the legislation?
Yeah, and I would say um, So the current process over permitting renewable energy projects gives all of the authority to local governments, and every local government, village, township, county, are able to participate in that. And unfortunately, there's just been a lot of fear mongering and stoking of disinformation, making people nervous about these renewable energy projects coming to their communities, even if they would be really beneficial for the communities. So this is House Bill 5120 and 5121, kind of changed how that process works in Michigan. So now it still gives some authority to local governments if they have zoning ordinances in place that are in good faith and allow for a reasonable permitting process for renewable energy projects. Developers still have to go to those local governments and try and get permitting from them as the first step in the process. If it's a local government that has passed a moratorium, or they have really unreasonable restrictions, like the setback requirements for a solar panel have to be like miles long, or something that essentially restricts any projects, then the developers no longer have to go through the local governments first. And some local governments don't have zoning ordinances. So rather than have them try and come up with them, the developers can instead have a more streamlined process, which means they go directly to the Michigan Public Service Commission, who cites other energy resources like fossil fuels currently, giving authority to the MPSC to have permitting power over renewable energy just kind of puts renewable energy projects on the same playing field as those other resources currently already have. But we still want to be cautious about making sure that local governments are involved and they're benefiting from these projects coming to their community. So we've seen that hasn't happened with a lot of fossil fuel plants. So there's also language in that bill allowing for community benefit agreements. So developers have to enter into agreements with the local governments, ensuring specific benefits. So that can be like money to a local nonprofit, whatever the local government decides they want to be in that agreement. And then the MPSC approval process, essentially the developers have to lay out a plan of the environmental impacts that need to be addressed, all of these different things that they have to consider in citing that project. And then the MPSC has authority to approve that. But then it's also going to be a contested case process. So local governments will have the ability to intervene in those cases, which gives local governments more of a voice. And there was also language put in where the developers have to give a certain amount of money to the local communities to give them the funding to intervene in those cases as well. So yeah, I think where the bill ended up really gives certainty to developers in renewable energy companies that Michigan is a place to come and build these projects. They have a streamlined process through the MPSC, but it does have some balance of making sure that local governments and the communities are still involved in the siting process.
So it sounds like if I'm a local government official, I want to build a strong, clear, reasonable ordinance that guides where solar happens and how it happens in my community. If a solar developer finds that to be egregious, they can appeal to the Public Service Commission, and there's an adjudicatory process for that now that didn't exist in the same way before. And if I'm a local government official who really doesn't want to deal with this, I can just let the Public Service Commission handle it. Is that the upshot?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, before we break, Carly, I want to talk a little bit about solar itself. Large scale solar is really exciting. It's big part of the future. But there's still a lot that people can do as individuals. Communities can do, institutions can do. They can put solar panels on their houses, on their parking lots. What's the what's the rubric in these laws for just plain folks and small businesses and institutions who aren't utilities that want to participate in this clean energy future?
Yeah, so I'd say the bulk of the package really does focus on the large utilities because that's the biggest impact that the bills could have is having um, utility companies that cover most of Michigan switch over to renewable energy. But importantly, Senate Bill 271 does have provisions around rooftop solar. So there's been a cap in place where only a certain amount of customers are allowed to put rooftop solar and participate in those programs with utilities. Unfortunately, the legislation doesn't completely eliminate the cap, but it does increase it from 1% to 10%. So until like 2030, we should be set. Anybody who wants to put rooftop solar on their house, we won't reach that cap for a while. So it allows a lot more residents to be able to do that and participate. That's really the biggest thing. I think we still need community solar enabling legislation to allow more local communities to have control over having solar in their communities and not have everything be run through the utilities. There is a lot of funding from the Inflation Reduction Act that is coming to Michigan soon. So there are a lot of incentives out there for everyday people to do their own energy efficiency work, install solar panels, geothermal heat pumps, things like that. So there are a lot of opportunities even outside of this climate package.
When money starts to flow into Michigan, I'm sure, Carly, we're going to want to have you back to talk about how people and businesses can tap into all that energy efficiency support that's going to flow into the state. This is not a done deal by any question, right? Like these these new laws establish the framework for getting us to a 100% clean energy, but they don't do the work. And so there's still a lot of heavy lifting over the next 17 years to get us to that point. One other important aspect of this, Carly, through the entire negotiation, you maintained a spreadsheet for the Environmental Council on what we were trying to achieve, what the status quo in the old law and industry practice was, and what the bills as they were in development and now the laws um, include. Bo has posted in the chat, folks, a link to Carly's final spreadsheet analysis there. It's really great. I encourage you to dig in if you're curious about the sort of minutia of what's in these bills. The most interesting part to me is what we didn't get done. And so she highlights places where we still have work to do and steps that we need to take and priorities for policy development that we should all keep pushing hard on. Carly, bless you. Thanks for such hard work. Congratulations on a well-earned victory for you and the entire environmental community and the citizens of Michigan and the energy industry. This is really something that is good for so many people. I'm excited to see it come to work.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And a big thanks to Charlotte Jameson too for really leading the charge uh, for Michigan Environmental Council to do this work.
I was like, who is she? Whatever. We can let Charlotte, like we've got a replacement for Charlotte now. She can go
No,
on
no.
vacation for months and months and we'll just put all the work on you.
I could never replace her.
Carly, thank you so much. Everyone on the webinar, thank you for joining us. You have asked a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A. If you've been around here before, you know that you'll get a follow-up email from us that addresses each of those questions and links to this webinar. So you can listen into what Carly was saying again, if you'd like. Really excited to be back on with you all. In 2024, we are going to be changing up the webinar format a little bit. I'm going to have Bo Brockett come on at some point and describe what we're going to do with our webinar series moving forward. He has come up with what I think is a very exciting new approach to digging deeper into these issues. You can tell by today's webinar that 30 minutes is just not enough to get to the richness of a complex issue like our clean energy future. The way we're going to handle our webinars running forward is going to let us do a lot more of that digging in. And I hope you'll find it more interesting, more compelling, and more informative. So stay tuned. Keep with us. 2024 is going to be great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you next time on Capital Connection.